Hey, good afternoon, guys. I hope you are doing well. Of course, I'm Mr. Nelson, and you are you. If you're watching today, this is day two of looking at the Great Gatsby. Yesterday, we talked about modernism and the Lost Generation. That is the group of writers that um, came out of World War One and decided that they were going to write kind of through their experiences, through their hardship and their disillusionment. Today, we're going to look at the beginning of The Great Gatsby. By now, you should have read a few documents about F. Scott Fitzgerald. After this, you're going to listen to a really brief radio broadcast about The Great Gatsby to kind of give some general themes and ideas and thoughts about the novel. Today, we're going to look at just some of our essential questions, and we're going to read the first 2 pages of The Great Gatsby to really get an understanding of what this looks like. Okay, well, without further ado, let's get started. So, The Great Gatsby. I love this book. This is probably one of my favorite books of all time. And the reason why I love it, there's actually multiple reasons why I like it. One is it's a really short read. There's less than 200 pages, and so we can knock this out about one chapter a night, which is what we're going to do in the next 2 weeks. And that's about 20 pages a night. And within that, those 9 chapters of this novel, the pacing is really interesting. You get the slow unraveling of the yarn ball that tells the story, that kind of shows us kind of everything behind Jay Gatsby, behind Nick, behind all the other characters that they interact with. And at the end, you're going, oh, wow, this is a really well-told story. These questions, these ideas are actually really interesting. So to get into The Great Gatsby, there's some essential questions that we have. They're kind of wordy, they're kind of bulky, but they're really interesting to think of in terms of looking at the novel. The first one is, to what extent are characters disillusioned or unsatisfied with their lives? Example, how are they disillusioned with their relationships, their employment, their social status, their wealth, their families, their personal histories? How are they unsatisfied? And what does that unsatisfaction look like? We finished yesterday's video with the Lost Generation talking about nostalgia, what nostalgia is, how it motivates us. And that idea of disillusionment, I think, is married well with nostalgia, because when we're nostalgic for something, there's kind of something inadvertently that we feel we're missing out on. We miss that thing, and because we miss that thing, we're disillusioned with where we are right now, which again is why we go to Disneyland, because we want to be in the happiest place on earth. But that happiness is 2/3 of what actually is. So that's our first question. To what extent are characters disillusioned or unsatisfied with their lives? The next question is, how does the historical context of when a text was written affect our interpretations? In other words, why does the historical context of Gatsby, when Fitzgerald wrote it, how does that help us to understand our current reading? Now, this is an interesting question, because in other words, it's asking us, is the time or its exigence, is the time that the novel was written still applicable to us today? Does it affect our interpretation? If it doesn't, okay, well then we might be losing something out of that. If it does too much, then it might be a period piece, right? It kind of only exists within the 20s. And so there is a certain extent to which a novel is only fits within its context. But outside of that context, well, that's where you get works that are enduring, works that last. So another question that we could add to this is The Great Gatsby a period piece that only exists within the 20s, or is there something more worthwhile for us that we can use to help us to modify our lives, to change our lives, to affect our lives, to learn something about ourselves? All of those things are worthwhile. And to what extent does the historical context only show us where this novel is, and what can we learn from it? Which is kind of the question that we have for any kind of work of literature that we read in any English class. How is this going to affect me? How does this affect my interpretation? Is it still worthwhile? Is the message lost to the past, or is it worthwhile for me? We're teaching this, and so I obviously think that the answer is, well, this is a novel that has sustained itself for almost 100 years. And so there's some reason why English teachers still make their high school juniors read this story. When we think about F. Scott Fitzgerald, there he is, the man, the myth, the legend. I love this quote from him. And I love to think about Great Gatsby through this quotation. Show me a hero and I will write you a tragedy. Show me a hero and I will write you a tragedy. In other words, I think this quote is telling us that any hero that you have, there's some tragic element that is revealed to us. And this is tragedy, not in the sense of like sadness, although there is sadness with tragic heroes, but I think that the tragedy that he's thinking about is probably some Aristotelian tragedy, some tragedy from the Poetics. We're going to learn about that in a couple of weeks, but really kind of to sum it up, this tragedy is filled with irony. It's filled with ignorance and knowledge and the growth between ignorance and knowledge. It's filled with the pacing of a story, and it's filled with that central person that has that hubris that is used for the best possible way within their lives, but is also used to blind themselves from their moral blind spots. Show me a hero and I will write you a tragedy. That certainly is Great Gatsby. Okay, when we first look at this novel, there's a poem at the beginning of it. Let's look at it real fast. Then wear the gold hat, if that will move her. If you can bounce high, bounce for her too, till she cry, lover, gold-hatted, high-bouncing lover, I must have you. This is the poem at the beginning of The Great Gatsby, and this is taken from one of Fitzgerald's other stories. And he's, which I think is actually kind of cool, that he's pulling from another story that's used to help us to understand, to enter into this, a tag, an epigraph, for us to understand what's happening in here. Take a moment and read this again. Think about this. How can we understand Gatsby inside of this? Pause the video, read it a couple times, and then come back to it. Then wear the gold hat, if that will move her. If you can bounce high, bounce for her too, till she cry, lover, gold-hatted, high-bouncing lover, I must have you. Now, I don't know kind of your experience with relationships, but when someone, this is kind of the core of all relationships, isn't it? That you see someone, some kind of lover, someone that you're interested in, someone that you want to get with, that you want to pursue, that you want to toss and spit some game out. But to pursue someone is kind of that exclamation, right? I must have you. So the beginning of this novel begins with a kind of obsession already, that to use this tag, to use this epigraph, tells us something. There is some kind of wild, abandoned pursuit. Someone inside of this novel is going to pursue someone that they want, maybe a lover that they want, that they'll do whatever they can to pursue that person. Okay, isn't this good already? All right, so we're going to read the first couple chapters, the first couple of paragraphs, pages of The Great Gatsby, and I want us to think about entering into this novel, to think about the pace, how Fitzgerald is structuring and ordering his story and what that tells us about how we can understand it. Before we get into that, I want you guys to think really quickly to yourself. What do you think it means to be a man? What is a man? What is a man supposed to do? What are they supposed to think? How are they supposed to dress? How are they supposed to act? How do they treat people? How do they treat people that are equals? How do they treat people of someone that has higher prestige than them? How does a man treat someone that has lower prestige to them? And in an article from the Esquire website, What is a Man? Is a really brilliant, hilarious essay by Tom Chalara, 2015, that asks this question, how to be a man? And it's just a long list of what a man is supposed to be. A man carries cash. A man looks for those around him. Woman, friend, stranger. A man can cook eggs. A man can always find something good to watch on the television. That's not true because there's so many things on TV that it's hard to decide. A man can cook eggs. A man can always find something good to watch on TV. A man makes things, a rock wall, a table, a the tuition money, or he rebuilds engines, watches, fortunes. He passes along expertise, one man to the next. Know-how survives him. This is immortality. A man can speak to dogs. A man fantasizes that kung fu lives deep inside him somewhere. A man knows how to sneak a look at and doesn't care if he gets busted. A man is good at his job, not his work, not his avocation, not his hobby, not his career, his job. It doesn't matter what his job is, because if a man doesn't like his job, he gets a new one. And the list goes on and on and on about what a man is and what a man isn't. A man gets the door without thinking. He stops traffic when he must. A man resists formulations, questions belief, embraces ambiguity without making a fetish out of it. A man revisits his beliefs continually. That's why men don't forever line up with conservatives, ever. Interesting. A man knows his tools and how to use them, just the one he needs. So here's a long list of what it means to be a man. So that's kind of the first question. What is a man? The second question going into this is I want you to think about what is the best advice that you've received from your parents. More importantly, I want you to think about what the best advice you've received from your dad. Because if we're asking what it means to be a man, well, we all have touch points of men in our lives that have been meaningful to us. Now, this may sound like gender specific, but inside of this novel, there's a look at what it means to be a man. On the other side of that, there's also assertions about what women are and who women are. Now, they only go so far as this novel can take us. But in looking at the men of this novel, we ask this question: are these examples of how we should understand men? Are these examples of what it is to be a man? And there's different characters that we're going to look at their masculinity. Nick's observations, the narrator of our story, he has observations about masculinity and the different characters that he interacts with. So think about that. What is a man? That's one. And two, what is the best advice you received from your dad? Okay, now you have those two things. Let's look at the first two pages of The Great Gatsby. Chapter 1. In my younger, more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my head ever since. There it is, right from the beginning, right? My father gave me advice. So that's right? We have men here, and we have advice, answers to those two questions that we asked before. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. What a good piece of advice, right? In other words, our narrator, notice how it's in first person. Our narrator is giving us advice from his father that says, don't judge people until you know their story. Don't judge people until you know their story. Well, that's kind of good advice, right? In other words, don't jump to conclusions. Get everything that you have before you can cast judgment on someone. That's some pretty good advice. So the first thing that we can identify is that this is in first person. When you read any novel, that's the beginning of any novel is tells you the gravity and the rules for that story. In other words, that you can understand the beginning of the story. You can see where the story is going based off those first 2 pages, of those first few pages. You have an opportunity to see the direction of the story. Men, fathers, no judgment. He didn't say any more. He didn't say any more, but we've always been usually communicative in... Sorry, guys. There we go. He didn't say any more, but we've always been usually communicative in a reserved way. And I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up my curious natures to me and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and to attach itself to this quality when it appears in a normal person. And so became that in college. I was unjustly accused of being a politician because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. There's men again. And what does that mean? What are the secrets of wild, unknown men? We have to ask questions when we're reading. And the questions can be surface level questions. In other words, what am I seeing? What are the facts of what I'm reading? And as we ask questions about the facts, we can ask questions about the interpretation. Well, that kind of sounds like our FIC graphic organizer. And so to ask questions about this, what are the secrets of wild unknown men? Have I met wild unknown men before? Maybe. Most of the consequences were unsought. Frequently, I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity when I realized by some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. For the intimate revelations of young men, or at least the terms in which they express them, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppressions. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. I am still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at rebirth. And after boasting this way of tolerance, I come to the admission that it has a limit. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock of the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and a sort of moral attention forever. I wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. Only Gatsby, the man who gives this name to his book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. If personality is in unbroken pieces of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. This responsiveness has nothing to do with the flabby impressionability which is dignified under the name of created temperament. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness, such as I have never found in any other person, and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. Oh my gosh. Seriously, every time I read the opening pages to this novel, I get chills. There's so many things that are worthwhile in here that show us what's going to happen in this novel. And it's great because you're going to read it and you're not going to see that it's there. But this is probably the seventh, eighth, ninth time that I've read this, and I see all the motifs, all the themes, everything that we look at, the style of Fitzgerald in these first two paragraphs. The first thing that comes to mind when we think about not casting judgments against someone, well, we call that tolerance, right? And after boasting this way of my tolerance, I came to the admission that it has no limit. He can tolerate so many things. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what's it founded on. Notice that that image right there, right? As if the things that you believe, the principles that you have, are your foundation, and the waves of life, the waves of things that brush against us, that crash against us, they hold us steady. But after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. When I come back from East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform, at a sort of moral attention forever. There's a couple things in here in this phrase that I love. One thing is, you can read this novel solely looking at the tension of the seasons. And so we get from the very beginning, the fall, autumn. Something happens in this novel from springtime to summer, the heat and the hotness of summer to the autumn and the fall of the end of this story. And I felt that I wanted to be in the world to be moral, to be in uniform, and at some sort of moral tension. Something has affected him so deeply that he wants the world to be recognized towards it. And we'll see at the end that recognition of what that looks like, why he feels that everyone should be aware of something. right? And then we finally get the title of this novel, the character of who this novel is named after. Only Gatsby, the man who gives this name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. There's an emotional word there, right? Only Gatsby, Gatsby, who represented everything. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him. Some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. Gatsby, on some level, according to this narrator, we don't know his name, but I'll tell you, it's Nick. First person kind of perspective of looking at the story. He says that Gatsby is like a machine that registers earthquakes. How is someone like a machine that registers earthquakes? What does that mean? What does that look like? Is it him? Is it his character? Is it his moral compass, his beliefs, his occupation, his personality? And certainly we get personality here, right? But what does that mean for someone to be like a machine that registers earthquakes? And then we get my favorite. This is my favorite part, this last sentence. No. Gatsby turned out all right in the end. It is what praised on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of man. I love this story so much. I'm going to use green because it's that good. I love this so much because the language is so beautiful. That sentence, right? No, dash. Gatsby turned out all right in the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. That's some terrible underlining, but forget about that. Gatsby turned out all right in the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby. My question going into this novel is, what is going to prey on Gatsby? What is the thing that is going to pursue him? What is the thing that is going to drive him to do whatever it is he's going to do? And so that leads us to kind of our questions that we had at the very beginning of this video. If you remember, one question that we had: to what extent are characters disillusioned or unsatisfied with their lives? Well, that might be some kind of answer, right? There's something that happens in this story that is going to answer that question of disillusionment and nostalgia. Or maybe there's going to be something that preys on him as a man. Or maybe it's going to be something based off of that advice that the narrator receives from his father. All of these are circulating around this novel, these themes, these motifs, these ideas. Everything is going to move us towards understanding this novel. And this is just within the first 2 pages. Just within the first 2 pages. You'll find that as you read this novel, as you just read the first chapter of this, you're going to begin to see examples of different characters, different men that are going to be types of man. And each man is going to suggest something about what it means to be a man. Now, don't think of this story as being entirely sexist or misogynistic. That's not the point of it. Fitzgerald is kind of asking this question, elevating this question of manhood in order, one, to define and understand that. But in doing that, you also inadvertently define what it means to be a woman and womanhood and the problems with that. I'm excited that you guys get to read this novel. The questions at the end of today's lesson are for you to think about who our narrator is. Who is Nick? What does he want? Why is he telling this story? Why is he writing it down in the book? The narrator is aware that this is a novel, and he's aware that that he's titled this novel The Great Gatsby. And so there's some irony in there that he knows what's happening at the end of the story, but we don't know at all. Who is Nick? What is Nick doing? One thing that you'll hear in the radio broadcasts right after this is there's no moral center to this story. Think about that as well. What does that mean for a story to have no moral center? Interesting. My friends, I miss you. I hope you're doing well. Happy reading. If you're listening to the audiobook on YouTube, happy listening. And I'll post a video for you guys tomorrow. As always, subscribe and smash that bell to get notifications when a new video is posted. I think is the thing that you're supposed to say. I miss you. Many blessings to you. Go in peace.